Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, if you're a return customer, you've heard me talk about this since the beginning of my channel, December of 2022, when I first created the channel under Waifu Cron. The plan was to be Waifu Chronicles, talk about my experience as a wife, mom, 30 something, late 30s, geriatric. But no, I've been wanting to do this video on my experience with having a daughter on the spectrum, being a first time mom. It was something that I was looking for help with when I first started noticing the signs that were present in my daughter. Also, looking for other information or experience. And a lot of the information that's out there mostly pertains to boys on the spectrum when you're looking at early development. At least it wasn't my case about 4 or 5 years ago when this all started. So there are some other topics associated with girls on the spectrum that I don't think get addressed enough, but I figured it would just make this video way too long. So we might end up doing like more of a series out of this. So hopefully it's helpful for you. What is ASD or autism spectrum disorder? It's a developmental, some sources and medical professionals say neurological disability caused by differences in the brain. People with ASD often have problems with social communication and interaction and restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. People with ASD may also have different ways of learning, moving, or paying attention. It's important to note that some people without ASD might also have some of these symptoms, but for people with ASD, these characteristics can make life very challenging. And I've seen different people talk about level 1, level 2, level 3 autism. My medical professionals that I was exposed to initially up in Northern California, they said they were actually getting away from that terminology because it's not very indicative of how broad the spectrum is. So you might see level 2, level 1. I think level 1 is the most severe. Level 2 is moderate. So the terminology that I was introduced to by therapists and pediatricians and psychologists and psychiatrists and everybody is impacted. So severely impacted, moderately impacted, mildly impacted, pretty basic. Because if you put these kids, especially at such a young age, into these hardline categories, it's not really representative of who they are or where they may struggle or just where they may need more help. And that's really what the topic is today, is how best to help parents. I was a first time mom. Everything was new to me. I didn't know what to look for. I didn't know that I needed to look for anything. I mean, we're going to get into the timeline of all of that, but all of these interaction skills, social skills, and all these avoids eye contact, does not respond to name by 9 months of age, does not show facial expressions like happy, sad, angry, and surprised by 9 months of age. It's a little tricky for me, and I'll get into that in just a little bit here, but I just wanted to give you a broad definition. If you just look up what is autism spectrum disorder, you'll get a ton of information. But so I just like screen grabbed a couple things that I thought summed it up pretty basically. So next up is restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. People with ASD have behaviors or interests that can seem unusual. These behaviors or interests set ASD apart from conditions defined by problems with social communication and interaction only. Examples of restricted or repetitive behaviors and interests related to ASD can include lining up toys or other objects and getting upset when order is changed. Things aren't in the rainbow. It's not precise. It's not perfectly lined up. You know, it's a problem around here, or it was. Repeats words or phrases over and over, called echolalia. I'll touch on that as well. Plays with toys the same way every time. Is focused on parts or objects, for example, wheels. Gets upset by minor changes. Has obsessive interests. Must follow certain routines, or there's hell to pay. Flapping hands, rocking the body, or spinning in circles. Also, unusual reactions to the way things smell, sound, taste, look, or feel. And a lot of that, to me, in my experience, has had to do with eating. So you'll find that many of those on the spectrum are deemed picky eaters. My picky eater is, to me, an extreme case, but I'm sure it looks and presents in whole different ways for everyone else. Most people with ASD have other related characteristics, including delayed language skills, delayed movement, delayed cognitive or learning skills, hyperactive, impulsive, and or inattentive behavior, epilepsy or seizure disorder, unusual eating and sleeping habits, gastrointestinal issues, unusual mood or emotional reactions, anxiety, stress, or excessive worry, lack of fear, or more fear than expected. So that's an interesting one to me as far as the unusual emotional reactions, anxiety, stress, worry, fear. A lot of the times you might hear about people on the spectrum not getting it, or they're closed off emotionally. My daughter falls more into this category where she's hyper emotional. She feels things very deeply. She just hasn't always been able to communicate those feelings, which get to be really frustrating. So we're going to dive in more, but there's still a little history to cover. So, like I said, girls on the spectrum are fairly hard to identify for a lot of people. I mean, a typical kid, and that's another term that I was introduced to in Northern California. I know a lot of that area in particular is very PC, but if you're around people that have children on the spectrum, or if your children are friends with other kids that are on the spectrum, a term that I was introduced to was typical. So you might hear neurotypical or neurodivergent. I don't necessarily go that far, but when I'm talking about your average kid that is not on the spectrum or doesn't have any other issues, let's say, I'll refer to them as typical kids. I don't say my daughter is non-typical or atypical. I don't use the phrase neurodivergent, but usually when I'm talking about other kids, I don't say normal kids. I don't say, those that don't have anything wrong with them. I mean, there's ways to say things without being offensive, um, if you care to be, if you care to not offend, by all means. So looking at the stats for autism, and this is from 2020, back when my daughter was diagnosed in 2020. Obviously, the statistics were a couple years outdated, and at that time, I believe it was around 1 in 46 kids in the US were diagnosed with autism. Now it is 1 in 36. So we're seeing an uptick in children receiving this diagnosis. I don't think it specifies the age bracket, but children, we'll say under 18. And of those 1 in 36, boys are diagnosed at a rate of 4 to 1 as opposed to girls. So they present differently. There are similar characteristics and traits that were listed on a previous slide. But a lot of times it's harder to tell with girls because they present differently. And now more medical professionals have done their research and, observations, and they're getting to where it's more easily identifiable in girls if you know what to look for. Personally, I had a nephew who was on the spectrum, and that's a whole nother story. But because I did have a family member on the spectrum, there were certain things on my radar. And so I would reach out to my sister, you know, ask her questions, because first time mom, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just following the mommy blogs and my little newsletter updates and telling me what your baby should be doing this month and what your baby's going to be doing next month. And everything was great. Everything was super great. She was tracking in the 95th percentile for growth and motor skills and just tracking beautifully. And I am not here to say anything about vaccines, but there is a correlation to our timeline that we experienced. It was around her 12-month vaccination schedule that I started seeing her progress regress. What's interesting is, in preparing for this video, I found milestones like I would have seen back when my kid was 13 months, 14 months old. And at the time, what happened was, I'm like, oh yeah, everything's good. Everything's just grooving along, doing baby stuff and awesome possum. And then it was around 13 months, 14 months. She wasn't ticking those boxes anymore. And those things that she was doing, she wasn't doing anymore. Eye contact kind of went out the window. Her ability to focus or her interest in interacting, it was like a light switch. It was the wildest thing. So it was around 14 months that I really noticed over the previous 2 months after getting her 1 year vaccinations. I asked her pediatrician that, she's not doing all the things anymore and kind of doing a backslide on some other things that she had been doing. So at that time, Dr. Mack, who was awesome, he said, keep an eye on it. It's a good thing you have a pulse and you know what you're looking for, so just keep an eye on it. And at her next well baby visit, which I think we went in around 15 months, her next well baby visit was at 18 months. Keep an eye on it. When you come back, we'll look at some options. And so that's what we did. Went in. She continued to regress in her social skills. She should have been talking. She should have been babbling more. She was babbling and trying to mimic sounds for a time, and then it stopped. Papa, mama, mama. How'd it go? So we didn't get as far as like mama, dada, that kind of thing, but she was mimicking sound and was interested. I think it's interesting when I was doing my research and putting this together, they now have signs of autism in the 14-month-old milestones section. A common concern for parents of toddlers is whether or not their child could have an autism spectrum disorder. Since autism can be apparent during the toddler and preschool years, kids with autism may have atypical communication, social skills, and behaviors. They may not hit 14-month-old milestones at the same time or at the same age as other children, or they may lose some skills they previously had. My kid, this was us. But this was kind of strange to me because this did not exist 4 years ago. Where am I? But they've added it. And again, I'm not saying anything about vaccinations or blaming vaccinations. We did go through the genetic testing because there is a quote unquote autism gene that was negative, non-existent. So in speaking to the geneticist, he's like, well, I guess it's just environmental. Could be from some medication you were on at some point for some time. It could be anything, literally anything. And you can't say that vaccinations do anything or else you get in trouble. So I will not do that, but I have suspicions. And the fact that it's now on your child's milestone page, it's sus, right? So post the 12 months vaccinations, there were behaviors that we began to notice. So obvious speech delay, fine motor skills. She wasn't able to articulate with her hands. She wasn't able to do some of the things like average, typical children could do or would be doing. Stimming. You'll see kids on the spectrum do hand flapping when they get excited or stressed. Any kind of like any excitement, whether it's good or bad, from like whether the stimulation is good or bad, positive or negative, they're stimulated and they got the wiggles. They got to get them out. So my kid didn't do hand flapping so much, but one of our therapists referred to it as finger dancing. So when she gets excited, her fingers go. And I've even caught it myself, like just like watching some of my old streams. Like when I get excited, I'm like, yeah, it's contagious. But anyway, so she's a finger dancer. Refusing to eat certain foods, limited diet, which you'll see in a lot of kids. They have, they're not in the best shape. They may be overweight because they're carb monsters like mine. My little kid is a carb queen, and it's a good thing she has energy in spades because all she wants to eat is toast and pizza and all of the carbs all the time. Disassociation, disinterest, solitude, solo activities. Really comfortable being independent, not seeking out interaction, didn't really want to play. Just very content with her snack, her water, and her toys. So, and I mean, that's not even just like an iPad. I'm talking like monster trucks, like hours of entertainment, just lining things up, moving them around, looking at them from different perspectives. It's, I mean, on one hand, if you're a person that's trying to work from home, it's like, well, that's kind of cool. But at the same time, keeping an eye on it, something's up. Repetitive actions, sensory thrill seeking, spinning, no concern of safety, unaware of surroundings. My child is a daredevil, thinks that somebody's going to catch her if she's going to fly or bounce or something. I don't know. But she just is really not concerned. So, yeah, that was stressful for a long time. I mean, it still is, not so much anymore now that she's going to be 6 in May. But, but yeah, just would just run away from you, no regard for what's around them, cars or otherwise. So it can be a little stressful. And it's like, don't hurt yourself. I know kids across the board, typical or otherwise, um, sometimes seem like they have a death wish, like they're trying to hurt themselves. And I am of the mindset, if the kid's doing something dangerous but safely, stay close, keep an eye on it, but let them try things out, let them learn, So that's my 2 cents on that. So hyperactivity, energy, echolalia we mentioned, repetition of sounds, words, or phrases. My daughter had a major speech delay, but even before she could talk, she would repeat sounds, nonsense sounds. Um, they didn't mean anything. They were just sounds that she likes. Now that she's talking a lot more, she's still going to speech therapy. She's talking a lot more, but she'll repeat phrases over and over, and she won't stop repeating the phrase until you repeat the phrase back. And then it's like she's snapped out of the loop and we can move on to the next thing. But it's just, we're working on it. Overstimulation, need to retreat, cover ears, close eyes. So it's not just like going to an amusement park overstimulation, or it can be loud noises. It can be lots of people. It could be there's too much stuff in the classroom that it's hard to focus. So I need to go hide. I need to cover my ears. I need a break. And that's a common trait for kids and people on the spectrum. Oral fixation. My daughter did have a problem with that. Not so much anymore, but for a time, I'm going to show you the chewies that we used. But yeah, these were examples of the behaviors in my kid. So the diagnosis. So I touched on this already. We talked to pediatrician around 14 months, 15 months. Put in the referral at 18 months for evaluations within Kaiser, who we had at the time. And that took about 4 months to get a diagnosis after appointments with psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists. They tested her ears to make sure it wasn't just like maybe a hearing problem, that she wasn't responding, or just cover all the bases. Did the genetic testing just to see what we could see, and then from there, diagnosis in June of 2020. From there, okay, you have your diagnosis. Now what? Well, the referral's put into another outside therapy group for ABA services, which is applied behavioral analysis, which is considered controversial depending on where you look on the internet. And I think it can depend. And if anybody wants to have a discussion on ABA pros and cons with me sometime, hit me up. Happy to. A lot of it has to do with the quality of your therapist and their methods. The reason, just for those that are totally unfamiliar, why there is criticism for ABA is that you'll see it especially from adults with autism on the internet talking about how they were treated like dogs. It's inhumane. It's not cool to do. There are therapists that are rigid and stringent in their methods, and it's not fun. I've had a different experience with therapists. Not all of them have been good, and there's high turnover. You go through so many of them, and it's not fun on the parent side, and having a new person come into your home for hours at a time, multiple days a week. But when you get a therapist who is good, which it's hard to find, this is another topic that I'm happy to talk about another time. I have no problem with ABA personally. If you have had a good experience, bad experience, drop it in the comments. I'd love to have a chat. But this is my experience. So from the referral to the therapy group for ABA, we also got a referral for speech therapy through insurance. What we did not get was a referral for occupational therapy. The other thing to keep in mind once you do have a diagnosis is not rely solely on your medical provider to handhold you the whole time. You need to be proactive, advocate for your kid, make sure they're getting what they need to help them. So, what we also did. So, okay, here's my step one. I'm already getting ahead of myself. Go through your primary care provider for assessments. Your child may or may not be approved for therapy, speech, occupational, etc., through your primary insurance carrier. We were prescribed ABA, applied behavioral analysis, and speech therapy through primary care, not occupational therapy though. So step two is to contact your areas or your location's regional center. There are regional centers everywhere. So at the time it was the Bay Area Regional Center for me. And from there, you can work with a caseworker or a case manager that will handhold you a bit. At least I had a good one. There's a program for children under 3 that's an early intervention program in which you will go through the assessment and evaluation process once again. So more psychologists, more psychiatrists, more occupational therapists, and speech. It was just nonstop assessments for months. Um, but there is a program that will help. And what they had done for my daughter, and that is my daughter, by the way, is they approved occupational therapy, which we didn't get through primary insurance. So it was just another layer to help her meet her developmental goals. And again, lucked out. Miss Lane right there. She was a total gem. It's obvious when people care about their job and they care about their kids, and it's night and day between getting a good one and a bad one. And if you've been through this, you might know what I'm talking about as far as like your kid's progress skyrocketing with one person, and then other people, it's like, well, what's the point? Why are you even here? Why are we going to these appointments? That's why. So um, that would be my recommendation: is reach out to your regional center, ask for help. They may be hard to reach. Keep calling, keep emailing, advocate for your kid. Um, so then once your kid ages out of the early intervention program through the regional center, there's going to be more assessments to see if they qualify under, in California, what's called the Lanterman Act for continued services beyond age 3. And if approved, it's something that they can have into adulthood. So while again, some people have issue with the stigma of a disorder or some sort of handicap, disability, my opinion is different. I understand. But my opinion is, as long as she needs it, this is a totally optional program. So if you feel that your kid doesn't need this anymore, you just opt out. You call up the regional center and say, I don't want to continue services. And that's it. So there's nothing that, I don't know, that you're tied to or that you're obligated to for indefinitely, right? It's there to help if you need it. Another cool thing about the regional center is that they will assist in covering copays in the early intervention program. So even if you have primary insurance, you still have a copay, right? And that can add up, especially when you're going to multiple therapies. Oh, every week. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. Through the regional center, they will pick up the copays, zero out of pocket. It's great. I mean, we were on an HMO plan, so it wasn't like, oh, it's because you had a great insurance plan, PPO, whatever. No, this was under HMO. So yes, there were $15, $20 copays on every visit, every assessment, every time somebody came to the house. And if it was the therapist and their supervisor, they they just add on more. So it's expensive for people. So they may not know that these resources, and it may come under a different name if you're in a different state, but there is always a regional center. That does not change across states. But as far as like Medi-Cal and all that, you'll obviously have something similar. Um, so with the Lanterman Act, if your child qualifies, then that means they can continue receiving services through the regional center into adulthood. And what that can also mean is you're eligible for, in my state, in my case, Medi-Cal. So the early intervention program covers the copays until they turn 3, but then not after. So with this, and this is the next step for you as a parent to go through the process. Hound, call, email, be on that phone as much as you have to be. It will help you so much in that it's expensive to get these services. And once you get approved, then you can apply for Medi-Cal. In California, again, you can apply for Medi-Cal, and that works as a secondary insurance. They cover the copays. So if you're worried about qualifying for Medi-Cal, it's not you as a parent that has to qualify. Like, I know initially I was like, well, household income doesn't seem like it would, I don't know, be a candidate for receiving benefits. But your child is the person that's qualifying. And since they don't make money yet, they qualify. So there were some things, some mental hurdles to get over with understanding the process. But once I got it, I'm like, oh, sweet. So uh, go for it. If you have any questions about it, specific to California, in my experience, I'd be happy to talk to you. We'll just move on. Uh, from there, as far as back to the observation. So we talked about the diagnosis and all that process. Not fun. So the speech delay. Because she couldn't communicate, there was lots of screaming all of the time. There was lots of screaming. And when you can understand, right? So you want something, you can't convey that. What do? You cry. You're a baby, so it's appropriate. um, and what had helped with that, the communication barrier, um, had a lot to do with the pet cards, picture exchange communication, also baby sign language. So she would sign simple signs like food, eat, and then point to something. We also made our own pet cards. So taking pictures of her commonly eaten or preferred food items so that she can say what she wanted specifically. Just eat and point to the picture, like a real picture, not just like a online version. Taking the actual pictures of her food, putting it on a whiteboard with magnets, and that really helped lessen the screaming and the crying when she could say what she wanted. Um, it seems like such a simple thing, but like the I want such and such. So I want to play, I want to eat certain food. So it wasn't just her food items, it was her common toys that she liked to play with, activities that she liked to do. The pet cards really helped a lot. And the sign language, just basic baby sign language, while continuing going to speech therapy and working on those verbal skills. Next up was the stimming and the hand flapping. I touched on that a bit. Finger dancers. Stimming can, the thing about stimming is that it can be a problem for the severely impacted or those that don't have the control to manage those behaviors. For instance, one of the therapists that we worked with, her son was 18 years old and he had a very disruptive stim. So when he would get excited, he would sway heavily in his head and his whole body. And he was a big kid. Um, Not something that is ideal for social environments, restaurants, and whatever, because it draws attention, and a lot of times it's negative attention, and that can cause the child or person um, to feel bad. I mean, I would. So lessening the severity of certain behaviors can be helpful in just the quality of life for somebody on the spectrum, even if they are more severely impacted. So next up is obsession with spinning objects, lining objects up, especially by color. My daughter is obsessed with the rainbow. It has to be in the right order, and the colors have to be identified and labeled correctly. So it's not just blue, it's cyan, or it's indigo, or it's royal blue. It's not just blue. They're not all just blue. So very particular. But yeah, so spinning objects, I had to pull her away from people's wheelchairs a couple of times. Uh, Lining objects up, that really hasn't been an issue as far as like harm or anything. So, but we would have like these long trains, actual trains, and like Hot Wheels or anything that was a set that had multiple colors. It would be lined up straight in rainbow order. And yeah, so it's this isn't a problem behavior, it's just a behavior. Sensory thrill seeking spinning, no concern of safety. Yes, it's something you definitely have to keep an eye on, especially if you're in a more heavily populated area. Currently, I'm in a rural area, which also comes with its dangers and wild animals and stuff. So um, they'll jump off of everything, and that adrenaline gets them going. And it's like, I know that's most kids, but it seems to be heightened amongst those on the spectrum. Hyperactivity, energy, yes, in spades. Um, when we first got the diagnosis, and it was the first school year post that, um, COVID and online school and everything. We were doing online preschool for 3 year olds, all on the spectrum on Zoom. It's it was not really effective, and that was her first exposure to school at all. But what I really appreciated about that was seeing these other parents struggling like me. It's like, we're not alone. It was comical in that it's like, I know that kid. That kid is my kid. The kid jumping off the couch and just like going ham. Like there was comfort in it. That's all. That's all I'm gonna say. So with that hyper energy, and they're bouncing off the walls and doing all these dangerous things, what has helped is, with the direction of our therapist, you just redirect that energy into something that's not dangerous, destructive, harmful. Not going to break everything in your house, but also not going to break their head. So if there's an energy problem, get a trampoline. Kids love trampolines, and it exhausts them. So um that's what worked for us for a time, and she loved it. And we every now and then gotta get the trampoline out, get your wiggles, because let's say it's been raining too long or it's too cold outside, you can't just let them go in the yard or whatever. So trampoline is a lifesaver. And I will point out that there are a lot of products labeled for autism this, autism that, really trying to get you to buy their product because, oh, well, it says autism on it, that's my kid. Get something comparable. Just broaden your horizon. Not everything that has the label is what you need. Oftentimes it's a lot more simple than that, and create your own ways to get wiggles out. So, but this is just something, this is a tool that worked for my kid. Also, the ball pit thing. A lot of the time when they're over energized, that hyperactivity, sometimes they're sensory seeking, and there are a ton of sensory toys. So with the trampoline, that could be a sensory, like looking for that adrenaline, that sensation, right? So they're seeking that out, and they're going to jump off your furniture to get it. But if they have an alternative, a safe alternative like a trampoline, a-okay, right? Also, behavioral issues. Sometimes when they're doing things they shouldn't, they're getting into something they shouldn't, they're looking for feedback. So find an alternative that gives them some sort of feedback, whether it's tactile, auditory, visual. Look for something that's going to stimulate or fill that need safely. And bubbles. Who doesn't love bubbles? But I will say that I don't think I've met an autistic kid that doesn't love bubbles. Even into their teenage years, it's when I was going to group events with her, I would always have a bubble wand in my bag, and it was always a hit. So, bubble blasters, just the bubble wands, the solution's cheap. The ball pit was a really fun thing for a time, and then it became a problem, so we had to pack that up and put that away. But in this other image here, where she's standing on her head watching her iPad, we were actually I was on a train ride with her, an Amtrak ride to visit family. But she still does this kind of stuff. She likes to observe the thing that she likes from a different perspective, whether it's in a mirror, or when she's upside down, or it's upside down, or in the reflection of some pan on the stove or pot on the stove. Like, it is what it is. And she gets a kick out of it. And, it's not harming anything. You can also make your own sensory boards or sensory bins, kinetic sand, slime, Play-Doh, stretchy things. Something that I just remembered when she was in occupational therapy, something that had helped her focus. Let's say the therapist wanted her to paint certain things. She had sensory pads that had different textures, little circular things, and she'd have my daughter stand on them. And because she was getting tactile feedback through her feet, it fulfilled some need for her to where she was allowed to focus more on the task at hand. She did the thing. She was hyper focused on, and meeting the requests of the therapist, and it was like interesting. I mean, it's just kind of, you really have to open your mind to stop go, well, that doesn't make sense. I don't know why that's it. Well, it just is. So try things out. If your kid has aversions to certain textures, work on getting them used to it. So let's say kid doesn't like slime. Start with shaving cream or something, that, because some textures are just too much, right? You want to work with them on making it to where they're comfortable, they feel safe, and those things don't hurt them anymore, or then they're not afraid of things hurting them. So yeah, there's a lot of options available for sensory needs, to meeting those needs without breaking the bank. So the next one was overstimulation, right? So we just talked about the need for stimulation, but now we're going to talk just a little bit about overstimulation or overload, whether that's auditory, visual, noise, or too many people around. They might need to retreat. And I did already touch on this, I know, but I'm going to show you some of the products that I've used that have helped my kid. My daughter loved going to the car wash, but it was too much, right? So she'd cover her ears, and something that had helped with her overstimulation, with her needing to go hide or feeling like she needed to hide or cover her eyes, cover her ears, was, I said, headphones, like noise canceling headphones. It just muffled. It took the edge off of the world, whether that was things were too noisy or if things were just too busy visually. She would still put her headphones on because that was her comfort, and it helped her process things at her speed. And so we just started carrying around headphones everywhere and sent them to school with her. And progressively, she's not needing them as often anymore. She's learning to cope with the world as it is a little better week by week, and it's fantastic. But I would suggest having headphones available if you've noticed that your kid gets scared, wants to go hide. With hiding, I did, if you can see here on the screen, typically have a tent or a dark space, a quiet space, something closed off where she can retreat to if she needs to just get away for a bit. So having a quiet space to hide out or retreat to is a good thing to have available, if not something like this tent. And then maybe just a corner of room free of distractions that can be used for downtime, allow for my kid to decompress. That's what I've done. Also, you're not always at home. You might be at a family member's house and they don't have a tent. Well, again, just a corner of a room free of distractions, simple toys, simple comfort. Hang out with them, or if they don't want you to, just let them decompress on their own. My daughter used to self-isolate a lot when she was overstimulated, socially or environmentally, and dedicating a space for it. Hey, when you feel like it's too much, go here and hang out for a bit. It's really, really helped. Usually what we would deem bad behaviors are indicative of a need not being met. So trying to be more in tune with what those needs could be, sensory or otherwise. Sometimes it's just your attention. Be a little more patient, try different things out, see what works. And lastly, we're going to talk about the oral fixation aspects, because this is a common one for children with a multitude of disorders or being on the spectrum, and that's oral fixation and putting objects in the mouth that should not be, things that aren't food, things that might harm them. I think as an adult, if you still have that, maybe chewing gum helps you. My daughter was constantly putting things in her mouth, chewing things to pieces, like tearing it up. So what was recommended to me by our therapist, who I adored and miss greatly, were these chewy necklaces. However, if you have a chomper like my kid was, these chewy necklaces that you get off of Amazon, they'll be destroyed in a day. She'll just tear them apart. So there is this website, Arc Therapeutic. They are more expensive, but the option with this place is that they have standard density, or they have medium, and they have the toughest, which is really hard. Nobody's biting through that. So just dependent on what your kid needs. Also, you're not buying as many of them like you would be on Amazon if you just get something a little tougher. So I think what I usually went with was medium density, and it helps so much. She's since not used it in probably a year or so, but again, replacing behavior. So you see your kid put something in the mouth that they shouldn't, reinforce the chewy. Right. So if you're on a necklace, you need your chewy, chew on this instead, this, not that, So I would definitely recommend, if your kid or someone that has an oral fixation issue, chewy necklaces, Arc Therapeutic, the way to go. Something else that has helped a lot, as I just said, this, not that, priming. So priming has been a huge deal. So first this, then that, because usually transitioning from one activity to another, maybe on, less desirable or not preferred activity, was difficult. And then you get the tantrums and the rages and like all those things, right? So priming your kid, as far as, this is the expectation. You have this for 5 more minutes and then painting or whatever, right? So 5 more minutes of iPad, then bedtime. Getting her used to that, a little bit of a rocky start, but consistency. Once you're consistent with this, first this, then that type of language, it becomes routine. And once routine is established, as we as adults, typical people, routine matters. And so for someone on the spectrum who has a very rigid mindset as to how things operate, they're going to be greatly tied to routine. So be consistent, follow through. First this, then that has been a huge help. It's a fairly subtle enough cue that helps, even if she's not even acknowledging me at the time. She'll hear me. She can process the fact that this is happening. The activity she's doing, maybe it's a preferred activity and she doesn't want to take a bath. Preferred activity is going to be ending, and then we're going to do the other thing. So coupled with this, then that, a visual timer has been such a lifesaver. She will set it herself. I won't even have to say it anymore. She's like, 5 minutes. I'm like, I didn't even give a time, but all right, you go, girl. So I've also recommended it to her teachers at school, because she was having some behavioral issues transitioning from preferred items to not preferred activities. First this, then that, timer. You have this much time left, or if she's doing an activity that's not preferred, you have 5 more minutes of said unpreferred activity before you can get preferred item back, right? Before you can get your dinosaur toy that you've been obsessed with all day. So prepping on either side. And since I talked to the school nurse after she had bit other kids and wasn't listening to teachers, they haven't had any problems at school. So it must be doing some good there. So if you don't have, let's say, this specific visual timer, I got it on Amazon. It's just a visual countdown. But there are a ton of visual timers in the App Store. So some are pay, some have commercials or whatever, but if you're on the go, you can't always just carry around a little round timer like me. But yeah, there's a lot of options, and the ones that have the pictures on them, the picture completes when time's up, those were more helpful when my kiddo was around like 3. Now that she's almost 6, she's comprehending the ticking down and all of that better. But if you have a really young kid, this type of visual timer is probably going to help you a lot. And next, preferred items. So if your kid's going ham on something and they don't even seem to hear you or won't do the thing you want them to do, a little bit of parental bribery never hurt. So something that they really like, preferred item they don't have access to all the time, could be an excellent motivator. Keep it up your sleeve to get them to change gears. So again, first this, then that. I'm pausing your show until you put your diaper back on. That usually worked for me. If you want to play with bubbles, you need to clean up the toys first. Remove access to preferred item until the activity or task is done. Definitely limit access to those preferred items so you can keep it as a valuable bribe of sorts. Moving on to bedtime routine, something that has worked for me. Maybe not for everybody, but this is what's worked for me. So bedtime was kind of a disaster for a while. And then I started a routine where it was about, time to wind down and get ready for bed. We say goodnight to iPad. You brush your teeth and we put on sleepy music, classical music, lo-fi. I let her pick. Allowing her to have a choice in the selection really makes my kid more compliant with the activity or request. So choices. Along that note, what do you want to wear today? This or that? Not just you're wearing this today. That doesn't really fly. So choices. So she puts on this, she picks her sleepy music and screens off. I had got a star projector. So they have the light setting that's like the northern lights, and then they have the green like laser stars that either stay static or they pulse. Currently what I do, goodnight iPad, brush teeth, pick your sleepy music, bed down, turn off what she calls the blue windy lights, the aurora borealis lights. And then it's star time. And then progressively I dim the stars. Yeah, she's not always a fan of star time. And it's like, no, it's star time. It's happening. So she may protest, but she's asleep within typically about 30 minutes. My next phase of adjusting the bedtime routine is, okay, mommy or daddy is only going to lay with you for 5 more minutes and not until she's totally passed out. And then we're going to go. I've experimented with it a little bit lately, some success. So that's the next goal, is to get her to be able to go to sleep by herself again, because she used to when she was really little. And then with moving and staying at my parents' house for a few months, a couple years ago, we had to adjust the routine again. So got to get back to better habits. But all that to say is, in my experience, routine has been everything. Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so. I do have a few more videos in this series coming out over the next several weeks or so. So stay tuned for those, and I will catch you next time.
Don't you like it? Subscribe.